While delivering to Motel 8, I knocked on a door and my fiancée opened it wearing a man's shirt. She told me she was at her mom's. When a man called her name from the bed, I remember that entire night with an unreal clarity, almost like my brain decided to carve it onto the inside of my skull. I had been on delivery runs since late afternoon, and by the time the order for Motel 8 came through, my body had already turned into that half-machine state you slip into after hours of repetitive stops. I accepted the delivery without thinking much about it. I had done that motel a dozen times. Cheap rooms, tired travelers, couples who avoided eye contact, and the occasional business guy who pretended his room number wasn't suspicious. Nothing new. My fiancée, Mira, had texted earlier saying she would spend the night at her mother's place because they wanted to cook something together. I didn't question anything. We had been engaged for 6 months, together for 4 years. I trusted her enough to assume she was exactly where she claimed to be. The sky had that washed-out late-night glow when I pulled up to the lot. A couple of flickering lights buzzed over the parking spaces. The kind of environment where nothing dramatic should happen because everything already looks so drained. The room number on the order was at the far end, the part of the motel with the broken ice machine and the constantly peeling paint. I grabbed the bag, stepped out, and walked along the corridor with the familiar smell of old carpet and someone cooking instant noodles behind another door. There was absolutely nothing in the universe hinting that my life was about to be kicked open and rearranged. I knocked on the door. 3 calm taps. Completely normal. Completely routine. The door opened, and everything inside my head shifted like the floor had tilted under my feet. Mira stood there. Not in her clothes. Not in anything she would wear outside. Instead, she wore a loose men's shirt, unbuttoned near the top, hanging over her shoulders like she had thrown it on in a hurry. Her hair was messy in a way I had never seen before. Her face froze the moment she saw me, and for a second I honestly felt like my brain had misfired. I thought I had grabbed the wrong bag or knocked on the wrong door. I checked the number. It matched. The order was correct. My fiancée was standing in a motel room, wearing someone else's shirt. Everything in me stayed quiet. I didn't explode or react loudly. My mind simply went into a strange calm, the kind that happens when something is too absurd for your emotions to reach it immediately. She started forming excuses that made no sound at first. Just the shape of words she didn't know how to complete. I stepped inside not because I wanted to, but because her body language told me she was trying to block the doorway. My presence became a gravity she couldn't hold back. The room was dim. One lamp was on. The blinds were half closed. And then the moment that split the whole night open happened. A man's voice drifted from the bed area asking where she had gone. It wasn't angry. It wasn't surprised. It was casual. The voice of someone comfortable enough to talk from a bed he shouldn't have been in. My shoulders tightened, and something hot crawled up the back of my neck. I turned, and there he was. A guy maybe around our age, shirtless, stretching like he had woken from a nap. He froze once he realized who I was, but the shock on his face wasn't guilt. It was confusion. The kind of confusion that comes when someone realizes they walked into someone else's chaos without knowing there was chaos in the first place. The air in the room thickened. Not loud, not dramatic. Just heavy in the way a storm feels when every part of the sky is holding itself together right before it bursts. Mira reached for me like she could undo the scene if she moved fast enough. I stepped back from her instinctively. The shirt she wore hung on her like a flag marking territory that wasn't mine anymore. My chest felt like it was being pressed inward by slow, relentless hands. I wasn't shouting. I wasn't shaking. My pulse ran in my ears, but my exterior stayed calm, almost eerily so. The man on the bed stiffened, sat up, and realized the situation was not what he had been told. He stared at Mira with the same kind of shock I must have had when I opened the door. That was the moment I knew this wasn't something spontaneous. She had been maintaining 2 parallel stories, and I had walked into the place where they finally collided. I didn't need to ask for explanations. The reality sat right there, fully visible in the shape of the room, the placement of the clothes, the absence of anything belonging to her except her purse tossed on the chair. I looked at the nightstand and saw a receipt. Motel 8. The same room number. The date wasn't old. It was from earlier that afternoon. My stomach twisted, not from the betrayal itself, but from the scale that began to form. If she had been there earlier, and she claimed she was going to her mother's, how many other lies sat beneath this one? How many other rooms, messages, afternoons, excuses? My mind ran through the weeks and months, picking up tiny details I had dismissed. The sudden schedule changes, the nights she claimed she was staying with her mom for convenience, the new clothes she said were on sale, the late-night phone vibrations she silenced quickly. Everything began knitting itself together in a way that felt sickeningly precise. I moved toward the door with the food bag still in my hand, my thoughts rotating around whether I should leave it or take it. That detail almost broke me. In the middle of everything, I still held the bag because my brain hadn't caught up with my heart yet. I placed it on the table by the door, stepped back into the corridor, and let the door swing shut behind me. Outside, the air felt colder. The parking lot stretched out in front of me, quiet and indifferent. I stood there in the middle of that silence with the dull roar of my pulse hammering through my body. I walked to my car, sat down, and didn't start the engine for a long moment. I stared at my hands gripping the steering wheel. They looked steady. My breath didn't. Something inside me had cracked without shattering, leaving this strange hollow space behind. As I finally pulled out of the lot, my mind tried to make sense of something that had no sense. Every streetlight I passed burned a hole in my thoughts. I reached a red light near a strip mall, and that was when my phone buzzed with a notification. It wasn't from Mira. It was from my bank. A charge at another motel, not this one. Same day. Earlier. Same general area, but different location. And then another notification. Another charge. 2 different motels within the same 48 hours. My breath hitched. That hollow feeling inside me twisted into something sharp. It wasn't a one-time lapse. It wasn't even a single affair. Something deeper ran beneath this, something that had been building long before this night. I didn't go home right away. I parked behind a closed bakery and sat there with the engine off, letting the weight of everything settle. My mind sifted through our engagement memories like someone flipping through photos with smudged fingerprints. There had been no obvious signs, nothing explosive. Mira had been distant at times, but affectionate enough that it never crossed into suspicion. Or maybe I had wanted to believe everything was fine. Maybe I had subconsciously ignored the pieces that didn't align. My phone finally lit up with a message from Mira. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even an attempt at explanation. It was a frantic demand asking where I went and why I left. That message alone told me she understood exactly what I saw, and that she was trying to control the narrative before I could gather my thoughts. My chest tightened with a complicated mix of anger and disbelief. I didn't answer. I drove home, unlocked the door, and stepped inside our apartment. The living room looked normal, untouched by chaos. Her shoes by the entrance. Her coat on the hook. The framed pictures of us smiling on the shelf. These everyday objects suddenly felt like props from a play I didn't know I had been performing in. I walked to the bedroom, sat at the edge of the bed, and leaned forward with my elbows on my knees. Another bank notification arrived. A rideshare charge from earlier that evening going to the address of Motel 8. She had used my card. She had used my card to pay for the room where she met another man. That detail dug deeper than anything else. It wasn't even the money. It was the ease with which she crossed every line. The weight of the night pressed down on me. My entire life up until this day seemed to belong to someone else now, like I had just stepped into a parallel reality where everything familiar had been quietly collapsing behind the scenes while I kept living normally at the front of the stage. And the worst part was knowing that this was only the beginning. The motel door was just the first crack. The real collapse hadn't started yet. It was still waiting around the corner. By the time the sun came up the next morning, my mind felt like it had gone 20 rounds against something much larger than me. I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, the motel room reappeared with the same awful clarity. The shirt, the other man, the look on her face. The details kept looping through my head like a broken reel. I tried to distract myself with anything, a shower, coffee, reorganizing my keys, yet nothing loosened the tightness in my chest. When Mira walked through the apartment door at 9 in the morning, it felt like a small earthquake rolled through the living room. She entered with the same confidence she always had after a night away at her mother's, except now that confidence hit me like a strange kind of insult. She looked at me sitting on the couch and froze, probably expecting something different. Maybe she thought I would be gone. Maybe she thought I would be pacing or yelling. Instead, I sat there in silence with bank notifications still open on my phone. She started talking fast, as if speed alone could outrun the truth. The words tumbled out in chaotic explanations that twisted themselves into contradictions. The longer she talked, the more obvious it became that she had prepared none of this. The panic in her voice showed she hadn't expected a collision between her stories. Every part of her body signaled fear of losing control. I didn't interrupt her. I simply let her speak until she ran out of space to put new lies. When she finally stopped, her breathing turned shallow. She reached for my hand, and I moved it away with a slow calmness that unsettled her more than any anger could have. The room filled with silence that felt heavier than the words she had thrown around. And then her phone started vibrating. Once, then again, then a third time. The same number each time. She tried to silence the calls without looking at me, but when I asked who it was, her throat tightened. She claimed it was her cousin. She claimed it was someone asking about work. She claimed anything except the truth. On the fourth call, I reached over and picked up her phone from the table. The moment I touched it, she panicked with an intensity one had never seen before. She grabbed for it, but I turned my shoulder away. The caller ID displayed the man's first name, the one from the motel. My stomach clenched as if my body wanted to reject the entire scene. His name alone created a new pressure in the air. I answered the call without a word. The person on the other end froze the second he heard my voice instead of hers. In that half second, he realized what had happened, and that was all I needed. I didn't stay on the call long. The silence between us held more truth than anything spoken. Mira rushed for the phone again. She wasn't trying to fix anything. She was trying to contain a fire that had already escaped the walls. When she realized she couldn't put it back together, she grabbed her purse, slammed the door, and left the apartment. The sound echoed through the hallway long after she disappeared. I sat there staring at the closed door, feeling my pulse gradually slow. Her absence brought a strange clarity. I understood then that the chaos was larger than one night. What I witnessed at Motel 8 was only one branch of something sprawling and tangled. The unanswered questions practically pulled me forward. I opened my laptop and logged into our joint bank account again. The list of transactions looked like a trail of breadcrumbs leading straight into the truth. Charges appeared from various dates, all linked to motels, ride services, food deliveries, and unfamiliar store locations. Most of them were small enough to escape notice on a casual glance, but together they created a pattern impossible to ignore. As I scrolled deeper, another detail tightened the knot in my stomach. The earliest charge of this kind dated back almost 2 months. She had not just slipped once. She had been living a double life with a precision that bordered on strategy. At noon, I received an unexpected email. A traffic camera citation. Apparently, my car had been captured making an illegal turn at an intersection I never used. The timestamp matched the night before. She had taken my car to get to the motel. That realization created another ripple of anger, but it felt cold rather than explosive. I clicked the link to see the footage. The grainy still image showed my car unmistakably. The driver's outline matched Myra's posture. The passenger seat wasn't empty. Someone sat beside her. A man. The same shape, the same hairstyle, the same build as the guy from the motel. My whole body tensed when I recognized him. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the screen. If she had been seeing him openly enough to ride around with him in my car, then the situation went even deeper than secret meetups. She had intertwined her life with him in ways that required time, money, planning, and a level of confidence I never would have imagined. The next piece of the spiral dropped into my lap an hour later. A message from our neighbor, Lana. She lived 2 floors above us and often left her dog with us when she traveled. She texted saying she hoped everything was okay because she saw something unusual last week and wasn't sure whether to mention it. I told her she could say whatever she wanted. What she sent made my fingers go cold. A video from her door camera showed Mira entering our building late at night with another man. Not the same one from the motel. A different man entirely. He had a jacket pulled over his head, but his body language screamed familiarity. They walked close. Their hands brushed. They moved like people used to each other. The timestamp was from a night Mira claimed she was working late. The moment I realized there was more than one person involved, the entire structure of what I thought I knew collapsed. The betrayal wasn't a single path. It was a web spreading in multiple directions. The calm inside me shattered into a mix of disgust and disbelief. For a few minutes, I just sat there in silence, letting the enormity of everything finally hit. It wasn't just infidelity. It was a series of layered betrayals stacked behind each other like hidden compartments. My fiancée had created an entire alternate reality next to mine without slipping often enough for me to notice. Eventually, I forced myself to think forward. If she spent the morning fleeing and hiding behind excuses, she would likely try to regain control of the narrative by the afternoon. I refused to give her the space to twist it. I needed clarity, not noise. So I collected everything: bank screenshots, footage, timestamps, the motel receipt, and the door camera video. I placed them into a single folder on my desktop. I didn't want revenge. I wanted to understand the full scope before taking any step. The last thing I needed was to act impulsively and end up in another trap of her making. When Mira returned around 4 in the afternoon, she looked exhausted and angry. She marched inside like she wanted to reclaim territory she believed she still owned. She started listing reasons for her earlier behavior that made less sense the more she talked. Every sentence contradicted the previous one. When she noticed I wasn't reacting, her confusion grew into frustration. She demanded that I listen. I stayed quiet. She insisted she had explanations for everything. I remained still. That silence must have felt unbearable for her, because she suddenly became defensive. She shifted blame onto me. She attempted to make herself the victim in her own narrative. Then her phone buzzed again. Same man from the motel. She turned pale, grabbed the phone, and stepped away to answer it. That moment was all I needed. I grabbed my keys and left the apartment without saying a word. I didn't slam the door. I didn't look back. I simply walked to my car, sat inside, and drove to the only place where someone could tell me the truth without caring about her excuses. Her mother's house. If Mira was actually with someone else the night before, then her mother would have already known something was off. And if she had been lying about being there for weeks, then the truth would show itself instantly. When her mother opened the door, surprise washed across her face. She welcomed me in with the same kindness she always had, unaware that I came with a storm behind me. I asked her whether Mira had stayed there last night. Her mother looked confused. Not guilty, not nervous, just confused. She said Mira hadn't stayed with her in over a week. The ground beneath everything shifted again. Her mother also mentioned seeing Mira a few days ago with a man she didn't know, but she assumed he was a co-worker because Mira brushed it off. That detail stung in a way I couldn't ignore. Now everything aligned. Mira wasn't just lying to me. She was lying to everyone. By the time I left her mother's house, I knew the second half of the collapse was coming. I had no idea how wild things would get, but the spiral had already tightened, and the web was beginning to tear. Driving back from Myra's mother's house felt like traveling through a tunnel where the walls kept changing shape. Every piece of new information reshuffled the interior structure of the story. Nothing lined up with the explanations Mira had tried to give. Every detail pointed to a carefully maintained illusion she had built around herself, and I had been living inside that illusion without noticing the seams. I parked outside our apartment building and sat there for a minute, letting the engine tick down. The sky was turning into a dull orange, and the shadows stretched across the parking lot in long strips. A couple of neighbors were unloading groceries nearby, unaware that my life was hanging from threads they couldn't see. When I finally stepped out of the car, I noticed a figure standing near the entrance. For a moment, I thought it was Mira waiting for me. Then the man turned his head, and I recognized him immediately. The same guy from Motel 8. He looked nervous, like someone who had been pacing for a while. He walked toward me slowly. His expression wasn't aggressive. It was cautious, curious, almost apologetic. He said my name in a way that hinted Mira had talked about me, but probably not truthfully. He explained that he had come because Mira wasn't answering him. He needed clarity. He needed to confirm whether she was engaged, or if I was just someone she had exaggerated about to manipulate him. His presence alone shattered another layer of her deception. The fact that he didn't know the depth of her lies showed she had manipulated both of us from different angles. He admitted he had been seeing her for a few weeks. He believed she was single. He believed she lived alone. He believed she had no obligations beyond work. Each piece of his story cut deeper because it exposed how thoroughly she had rebuilt her entire identity around whoever she was with at the moment. Before I could even process anything he said, the apartment door swung open upstairs. Mira stepped out onto the walkway, spotted us, and froze. Then, in a split second, shock turned into anger. Not guilt, not fear, anger. She stormed down the stairs with a speed that didn't match her usual calm demeanor. Her voice rose instantly as she started accusing the man of betraying her trust by coming here. She accused me of trying to embarrass her on purpose. She made it seem like the presence of both of us in the same place was part of some coordinated attack. Neither of us had planned this, but her reaction made it clear that transparency was her worst nightmare. Her accusations grew louder, twisted, frantic. The neighbors unloading groceries paused, silently watching from a distance. The man from the motel looked stunned. He asked her directly whether she had told me they were only co-workers. She shifted her story 2 or 3 times in a single sentence, contradicting herself so rapidly that it became impossible for even her to keep track. When she realized she couldn't talk her way out, she attempted something more desperate. She lunged for my phone. The movement came out of nowhere. One moment she was yelling, and the next she grabbed my arm with enough force to pull me slightly off balance. She went straight for my pocket. Her fingers brushed the phone, but I stepped back. She reached again, but this time with a frantic intensity that drew more attention from neighbors. Her behavior crossed a line I didn't expect her to cross. She wasn't fighting for the relationship. She was fighting for the destruction of evidence. I refused to let her touch the phone. When she realized she couldn't overpower me physically, her panic rose even higher. She shouted at me that I was twisting everything, that I had no right to collect anything against her, that I was violating her privacy. The words shot out rapid fire, but none of them landed with the power she wanted them to have. The man from the motel tried to intervene, telling her to calm down. Instead of listening, she turned on him with the same hostility. She claimed he had misled her. She claimed he tricked her. She rewrote the story right in front of us, framing herself as the victim of 2 men who had conspired to humiliate her. The desperation in her voice wasn't sadness. It was fear of losing control of her constructed realities. Then another twist dropped. A second man entered the parking lot. The man from Lana's door camera video. He came walking toward us with a hesitant expression, holding a jacket she had left in his car. He said he came because she hadn't answered him either. He apologized for interrupting, unaware of the chaos he was stepping into. When he recognized Mira, he stopped cold. When he saw the other man, he looked confused. Then he noticed me. Everything inside me clicked into place. 3 men, 1 woman, 3 separate stories she had told each of us, all intersecting by accident in a single parking lot. Myra's face drained of color. Her entire posture collapsed. The man from the motel stared at the new arrival, realizing instantly that he wasn't the only one she had been lying to. The second man looked between us, connecting the dots at lightning speed. He wasn't angry. He looked betrayed, then disappointed, then quietly resigned. The scene became a spiral of impossible contradictions. Mira tried to separate the stories again, but it was too late. The threads had finally collided in the open. Every contradiction she had built snapped under its own weight. The neighbors watching began murmuring. Someone pulled out their phone. Someone else whispered something to a friend. The air felt like it was vibrating with tension. Then a voice cut through everything. A neighbor on a balcony yelled down that they were calling the police because the shouting had gone on too long. Mira turned toward the balcony, screaming that they didn't understand the situation. Her voice echoed sharply enough to startle one of the men standing beside me. 2 squad cars arrived within minutes. The officers stepped out and began separating us. They took each of our statements individually. They asked questions in a calm, professional tone. The other 2 men explained their involvement. I explained what I witnessed at the motel and everything that followed. Mira struggled to maintain a consistent story, switching between calm explanations and sudden outbursts. The officers eventually asked her to sit on the curb because she kept interrupting everyone else's statements. The entire collapse sat right there in the open. Her lies, her manipulation, her spiraling panic. All of it wrapped around her like tangled wire she couldn't escape. One of the officers pulled me aside privately and asked whether I wanted to file a complaint about her attempt to grab my phone and the chaos she caused. I told him I didn't want anyone arrested. I wanted distance, clarity, and separation. He nodded, understanding the complexity. When the police finally left, the 2 men also walked away in silence, each processing the shock of discovering they weren't the only ones. One gave me a nod before leaving, a small gesture acknowledging that we were all injured by the same person. Mira remained standing in the middle of the parking lot long after everyone else had dispersed. She looked lost, cornered by consequences she had never imagined she would face. She tried to approach me again, but I stepped back. Her expression shifted from pleading to furious, then back to pleading again. Her emotions flipped so rapidly that she seemed unsteady. I didn't speak. There was nothing left to say. The truth had unfolded without any help from me. Everything she tried to hide had surfaced by the weight of its own contradictions. When I finally walked back to the apartment, I didn't slam the door. I simply closed it quietly behind me. That quietness felt heavier than any confrontation could have. It felt like the end of something that used to hold meaning. But the biggest consequences were still waiting just over the horizon, and I had no idea how deep they would go. The apartment felt strangely quiet after everything that happened in the parking lot. A normal kind of silence, but hollowed out in a way that made every small sound too sharp. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, letting my mind sift through the chaos. The truth about Mira had unraveled so fast that it felt like I had lived an entire year inside one afternoon. Now all that remained was the aftermath, a stack of broken promises, a pile of receipts, and 2 men who had walked away from her with the same mixture of disbelief I carried. I realized the future wasn't going to rebuild itself. I needed to make decisions before she could twist anything or bind me to her mess even deeper. By the next morning, I went into full clarity mode. No anger, no impulsive moves, just calm, structured actions. The first thing I did was contact the bank. I froze our joint account before Mira could drain it or use it to hide more motel charges. The representative walked me through the process, and when they asked whether the freeze was due to suspected fraud, I felt a strange heaviness settle in my chest. I said yes. They opened an investigation automatically. That single confirmation sent a wave of consequences rolling outward in ways Mira probably never anticipated. Once the account was locked, I opened my credit report. That was when the second wave hit. There were 2 active credit lines I didn't recognize. Both opened within the last 3 months. Both tied to my identity. Both showing purchase patterns that matched her behavior. My hands tightened around the laptop. It wasn't just the cheating. She had been borrowing against my name while maintaining a parallel dating life with multiple men. I filed fraud disputes on each of the accounts. The process was long and required documentation, but every part of it felt like reclaiming something she had been quietly stealing. I gathered everything: screenshots, emails, statements, timestamps, camera footage. I printed and organized it all into a folder. Not because I wanted to take her down, but because I wanted to prevent her from dragging me any deeper. By noon, Mira finally tried to return home. Her knock on the door came with a sharpness that made the hair along my arms rise. She called my name in a tone that mixed entitlement and panic. I didn't open the door. I told her through the wood that we were done sharing space. She insisted she needed to talk. She claimed she needed closure. She claimed she deserved a conversation. I told her she could send everything in writing. Her voice trembled with anger. She wasn't used to losing control this way. She wasn't used to anyone setting boundaries she couldn't break. Eventually she left, but the sound of her footsteps down the hall carried more volatility than any argument could contain. That evening I visited the leasing office and explained the situation. Since I was the primary leaseholder, removing her wasn't complicated. I submitted the paperwork, and they scheduled a lock change for the next day. The manager had seen similar situations before and guided me through the steps with a steady, professional tone. As I signed the forms, I felt a slow, steady shift inside. The kind that happens when you finally reclaim your life after watching someone else twist it. The next morning brought the next ripple. Myra's job contacted me. Not directly, but through an automated HR email linked to our emergency contact forms. She had been suspended pending internal investigation. At first, I didn't understand. Then I remembered something her mother had mentioned. Mira had been using her work hours for personal outings. She had requested multiple urgent leave days recently. And once the fraud investigation hit the bank, it triggered a cross-check with her employer because one of the fraudulent credit cards had a charge at a supply store linked to her workplace. Everything she had tried to juggle was collapsing at once. Later that afternoon, one of the men from the parking lot called me. Not to reconnect, not to debate, just to clear his conscience. He explained that Mira had asked him to lie on her behalf the night everything unraveled. She tried to convince him to claim she was being stalked. She tried to frame the situation as harassment. He refused. He told her he would not be part of another lie. Then he blocked her number. His honesty brought relief, but also a strange sorrow. Not for her, but for how many people she had manipulated. Her web of lies wasn't designed to preserve love. It was designed to maintain appearances and control. 2 days later, the fraud department contacted me again. They needed a statement in person. When I walked into the branch office with a folder of evidence, the representative took one look at the neatly arranged documents and understood the severity immediately. They froze all accounts she had touched. They forwarded the case to their legal division. They informed me that, depending on their findings, charges could be filed. I walked out feeling both lighter and heavier. The truth was doing its work, but consequences have gravity. Meanwhile, Myra's life deteriorated at a speed that might have frightened someone else. Her suspension became a termination. Her employer had discovered she used company time to meet one of the men at a motel, leaving early on a shift she was supposed to cover. That alone violated enough policies to justify the firing. When her income stopped, everything she had been balancing financially collapsed. She missed her rent payment. Her landlord gave her a formal notice. Her car insurance lapsed. She tried to reach out to friends, but many had heard pieces of the parking lot incident and stepped back. The web she built didn't just fall apart. It imploded inward. Her mother called me once, not to blame me, but to apologize for everything. She said Mira had shown up at her house in tears, trying to frame herself as the victim. When her mother asked straightforward questions, Mira broke down further and admitted pieces of the truth. Not all of it, but enough that her mother understood the scope. She told Mira she could stay temporarily, but she made it clear that she had to repay some of what she stole from me and handle the consequences of the fraud. That conversation made me feel a strange mixture of relief and closure. Not satisfaction, not revenge, just the peace that comes from knowing the fallout was happening organically. 1 week after I removed her from the lease, the lock was changed. The apartment felt different. Quieter. More honest. I took time to rebuild my routine. Deliveries. Groceries. Work. Evenings alone that didn't feel heavy anymore. The storm had passed, and all that remained was a landscape I could finally navigate without walking into hidden traps. A month later, I received the final update from the bank. They approved the fraud case. All charges Mira opened in my name were legally reassigned to her. She became responsible for the debt. I was cleared. 2 days after that, I heard through her mother that Mira had taken a job in a small retail store outside the city. It wasn't glamorous, and it didn't pay much, but it was all she could find after losing her previous job and being flagged for internal misconduct. Her mother said she didn't hate me. She said Myra's actions forced a reckoning none of us saw coming. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Closure doesn't always require words. The consequences had landed exactly where they should, not out of revenge, but out of reality catching up with her decisions. As for me, I stayed in the apartment, kept my routine, and slowly reclaimed parts of myself I hadn't realized I had lost. The quiet didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt like room to breathe, room to rebuild, room to imagine a future not built on illusions. A future where Motel 8 was just a memory, not a wound.